Sì, anche qui le prese. Tipo ne ricade.
Ok, le slide le abbiamo distribuite, molto bene. E le mettiamo qua, se c'è il ritardatore la pennina la carichiamo adesso. Ok. Già avviato la... Qui non registriamo.
No, non registriamo.
Non registriamo.
Ma questa è quella scelta?
No, sono attivati il
Gli ultimi arrivati ci sono dei set slide qua, se lo volete. So, first of all, it's nice to see you again. I'm referring to you here, but also to those who are at home, 43 people, some of which I hope to meet in the afternoon, because probably after lunch we're going to have additional people joining the session, I hope. Buongiorno, Jalase. In any case, let me tell you a couple of organizational things. The first one is that, as you know, tomorrow you're going to start with Professor Almeida. Okay. What time is Flan beginning? 9:30? 9:30. 9:30. Okay. I will join you later. Unfortunately, I need to bring the baby at the nursery, so. And then I will catch the train to reach you. But I won't be here at 9:30. I think that Niccolo will be here and probably Roberto, so much more prestigious people attending the session. And he's going to present Professor Almeida. My suggestion, as I told you, not you, to the guys at home, is, if possible, join the session personally, because this is a rather unique opportunity of meeting a very prestigious professor of finance, and the interaction that you can have here in the school rather than being at home is radically different. Okay. Moreover, I've seen his material that will be uploaded this morning, in the afternoon, and it's full of mini cases and everything else. So if you want to get 100%, I would say, of his very expensive presentation, my suggestion is that you come here. I don't know why you are at home. For some of you, I understand if you are physically far away from Turin, but those that are close to Turin, or you even live in Turin, if I were you, I would definitely join the sessions. Okay? Professor Almeida will have, as you will actually introduce the three topics, as I told you at the beginning of our meetings. The first one is how corporations issue securities, bonds and equity, bonds and shares. The second one is on the dividend policy. Okay, and the third and final one is some introductory concepts on risk management for firms. Okay, so it's rather, I've seen the slides, very nice slides, very American, if I may say, which is positive. I mean, few things, so he's gonna speak a lot. The impression that I have is don't rely on the slides. I mean, at least those that I've seen are not exactly like these ones. No, that you cannot even read the content. If there are 10 words in each slide of Professor Almeida, it's probably too much. Okay? Which is the right approach, by the way. Okay, that concerns Professor Almeida. Concerning our last and final meeting that we're gonna have today, we basically are gonna share one topic. The topic is hybrid financial instruments. More specifically, we focus our attention on the convertible bonds. And you will understand the reason for this choice in a few minutes. Okay? My intention is that we use this mini session. You want the slides? Paper version of the slide? 1, 2, 3. Come on. Ha urlato il suo fidanzato. Lei cazzi il fidanzato, faccia le cazziate, qualcosa avrà fatto. In genere siamo indifendibili noi maschietti, non ne rendo conto. Però siamo cosa mai siamo dei babbei. È vero, no, non c'è paragone. Anche tu qua sei capitato per caso oppure sei venuto? Vieni qua che ti do le slide, vieni qua che ti sistemo per le feste, vieni. I settle you for the holidays. Poni attenzione a quello che si dice oggi. Anche tu. Ragazzi, siamo un dispensatore di slide. Primore e... Come stai? È tutto gratis, vai, offro io, vai. Allora, I was saying, the intention is the following, is that we're going to use these 45 minutes that we have, actually 50 minutes that we have for introducing the concept. I suspect that 1 hour is not going to be enough for exhausting this set of slides. If that's the case, we will continue immediately after lunch. It could take an additional half an hour, 1 hour, nothing more than that. And immediately after, we're going to start the preparation of the Promodesk case, which will be discussed immediately after. Exactly as what you have done with Mr. Niccolo Nirino here with the Diageo case. How was the presentation of Professor Nirino? He's here, you should be nice. I know, I understand you feel embarrassed. You want to say that it was a disaster, but it's nice in front of him. È stato bravo. Bravo Niccolo.
Thank you.
I don't know how to put it. If you agree with what I'm saying now, I would appreciate. Do you think that if we are able to concentrate as much as possible the content of the day, exhausting the topic, by exhausting the topic, not leaving anything somewhere, do you think that would you accept leaving the room at 5:15? Is that a problem for you?
No.
Are you sure? Okay, so let's go right, so that I can catch the train at 5:45. Because otherwise the other one is at 8 o'clock, and frankly I don't know what to do. Rather than eating chocolate in Piazza Carlo Felice, but 2 hours of chocolate. You know, if I could avoid doing that. Francesca, che c'è? Ma che hai? Ma perché?
Ma niente, sto ascoltando.
Dobbiamo risolvere questo problema. Siete adorabili. I'll miss you. Aspetta, mi asciugo la lacrima. So, my dear friends, if you agree with that, I would like to start introducing the concept of hybrids using this set of slides that as I shall continue, right?
Yeah.
Mancano queste slide. Esilio, ne chiedo scusa. È stato il mio errore. No, non si preoccupi. Allora, so I think now it's shared also with your colleagues at home.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
You have your microphone off for those who
Ah, last, sì, ecco, sì, giusto. Ah, non mi vedevo nemmeno, sti fetentori non gliene frega niente. Questa la dice Cuba sul livello di attenzione.
Buongiorno professore, buongiorno a tutti.
Oh, Felice, ben trovato.
Buongiorno.
Sei felice?
Sì.
Sono proprio contento di risentirti, caro Felice.
Anche io.
Sei un mentitore seriale.
Professore. Vedi, c'è anche l'aura bianca lì che mi santifica.
Chi c'è? No, ci vediamo? Sì, sì, è vero. Hai ragione.
C'è un'aureola bianca.
Domani e dei giorni a seguire ci sarai per Almeida?
Sì, sì.
Ok. Io spero di seguire il più possibile anche io, c'è sempre da imparare questo.
Assolutamente.
Okay, so if you're ready, we're gonna go ahead with the hybrids or hybrid financial instruments, okay? First and foremost, what do we mean with hybrid financial instrument? As this slide says, probably the easiest and the most succinct definition of hybrid security is that we're dealing with an instrument of financial security that combines, the key word is combines, some features of debt and some features of equity. They're called hybrids because it's a sort of a mix of debt and equity. For some instruments, the debt component prevails. For other instruments, the equity component prevails. It depends, okay? There is a huge variety of hybrid financial instruments, huge variety of instruments, but I believe that they can all be examined by, for example, using a table like the one that you see here on your board that differentiates or qualifies the various categories of financial instruments according to the major features of each of them. What I, for example, prepared here is to qualify and differentiate the financial instruments according to 1, 2, 3, 4 important elements that qualify a financial instrument. The seniority, the guarantees, the voting rights, and the remuneration. And the story goes as follows. Let's consider the classical plain vanilla debt. A loan, a normal bond. Okay? These two categories belong to the plain, they're called plain vanilla. Okay? Plain vanilla vuol dire semplice, cioè standard. Okay? In terms of seniority, as you probably know, as you surely know, debt ranks first. Ranks first compared to whom? Compared to equity holders. So in case the company goes bankrupt, creditors are repaid firstly. And equity holders are what we say residual claimants. But even in terms of recurring remuneration of creditors, what I'm referring to is the payment of interest expenses and the regular repayment of the capital. Creditors must, it's a must, must be repaid, must be serviced before the equity holders. Let's put it this way. If a company has an outstanding loan or a bond and pays an interest rate and interest expenses on that bond, that interest expense that occurs on a regular basis, monthly, quarterly, 2 times a year, così dice semestrale? Semestrale in English, how do you say? Monthly, quarterly, twice a year or on an annual basis. These interest expenses must be paid before the distribution of dividends. Okay? And the capital repayment that belongs to creditors must be repaid before the distribution of dividends. So it means that financial creditors are senior vis-a-vis the equity holders, which are subordinated. Okay? If you could, let's compare line number 1 of the table and line number 3. Okay? Leaving aside line number 2. Okay? For the moment. So the debt holders are senior, the equity holders are the most subordinated, even residual claimants that the company may have. What happens to now we're moving toward the intermediate, the second line. What happens to the hybrid securities in terms of seniority? The hybrid securities normally, frequently rank in terms of seniority in the middle, somewhere in the middle between senior creditors and residual claimants, the equity holders. For example, let's consider an example. Preference shares or preferred shares, azioni privilegiate for the Italians. As you know, or if you don't know, I'm going to tell you that now. The preferred shares, the azioni privilegiate, are privileged in terms of the seniority of payments, and in case the company goes bankrupt, in terms of an earlier repayment of these shares vis-a-vis the ordinary or common shares. So it means that these preferred shareholders, they rank ahead of the ordinary shareholders. However, simultaneously, they rank behind the financial creditors.
Qualcuno sta condividendo lo schermo, please.
No, ma facciamo vedere, magari ci condivido anche la fotografia. Sa mai. Vediamo se non ci sia lo scaccolone pazzo.
Ora dovrebbe ricondividere le persone che l'ha annullato. Mi ha annullato la condivisione, quindi dovrebbe ricondividere il suo schermo.
Cioè praticamente abbiamo gli hacker. Okay, so do you understand what it means that they are subordinated to creditors, the hybrid holders, but simultaneously they are to the equity holders? It's like being a terrore, no? Si è sempre terrori di qualcuno, cioè I am a Neapolitan and I am a terrore vis-a-vis di torinesi, but somebody coming from the south of Sicily is per esempio un terrore rispetto al napoletano, no? Quindi something similar happens with the seniority of financial instruments. They are the real top class creditors, security holders, which are the financial creditors. You want to be even more pragmatic, banks, commercial banks, which rank ahead of everybody in case of problems. Then there are, for example, the preferred shareholders, and then there are the ordinary shareholders. So there is a ranking. Senior, subordinated, deeply subordinated, or if you prefer, even residual. That is what concerns the seniority. What about the guarantees, the second column? Generally speaking, there are some exceptions, but as a general rule, this is exactly the way it works. Banks, commercial banks, when they lend money to a company, they normally require a guarantee. So their credit as a bank, is normally guaranteed. On the other side, the final line of your table, equity holders are not guaranteed by anything. Their share is not secured by anything. Okay? There's a general security on the overall assets of the firm, but it's a residual security that counts whatever it counts, nothing, basically. What happens to the hybrid financial instruments? It happens that sometimes, not always, they are guaranteed, sometimes. And if they have a guarantee, very frequently this guarantee is a kind of second lien guarantee. For the Italians, if they get an ipoteca, they get an ipoteca di secondo grado. Okay? Which means that they may be guaranteed even on specific assets, ipoteca di secondo grado on some specific assets, which is a mortgage on specific assets, second lien mortgage on specific assets, but at least they have some guarantee. And you can see that even in terms of guarantees, they are somewhere in the middle, the hybrid instruments, between a classical plain vanilla guarantee and a zero guarantee for equity holders. They are guaranteed, but not that much. Third element, Francesca, voting rights. In terms of voting rights, normally the banks, the commercial banks that lend money to a company, they do not have any voting right, right? They don't have, voting right is zero. On the other side, ordinary shares, they have, we say, full voting rights, because they can vote both in the ordinary meeting and in the extraordinary meeting of shareholders. So we go, in terms of voting rights, you have 0% voting rights, 100% voting rights. What happens with the hybrid instruments? They frequently have limited voting rights. And we go back again to the example of the preferred shares. Azioni privilegiate, as you know, they have the voting right, which is limited to the extraordinary shareholders meetings. Okay? So they are, even in terms of voting rights, somewhere intermediate between zero voting rights and 100% voting rights. Finally, remuneration. Actually, here I wrote low, intermediate, high, but there could be also another key for interpreting this specific element of remuneration. Let me quote both of them. The one that you see here is low, intermediate, high. And the story goes as follows. Bank debt, or if you let's wear the glasses and the hat of a bank. The bank credit with a company is relatively safe. Why? Because you rank first. Because you frequently have guarantees. You normally have guarantees, first lien guarantees, so you feel quite protected. Okay? If your risk exposure as a bank toward the company is relatively limited, your remuneration is going to be relatively limited as well, because there's we have learned in finance that there is a direct relationship between risk and return. On the other side, the equity holders, they are subordinated, deeply subordinated, residual. They don't have any protection in terms of guarantee. It means that they face the highest exposure compared vis-a-vis the other financial instruments, and it means that they have the higher risk and they do expect the highest return. What happens to the hybrid instruments? Now we know the story. The story says that they position themselves somewhere in the middle between debt and equity. Okay? Because they are relatively protected, they are relatively senior, they are relatively everything. Their remuneration is intermediate. I would be tempted to write, if I may, can we first take this, otherwise we're going to have a problem like last time. Let Let me see if I remember what I did last time in order to. Just 1 second. Okay. Mannaggia, com'era la storia?
Camera.
Sì, questa cosa. USB video capture. Ok. Ok, condividi. It's already shared, right, with the others? Okay. So, let me write. This is a disturbing chair. Okay. The story goes as follows in terms of risk-return profile concerning the three categories of financial instruments that I've just mentioned in the slide. Let's assume that we put on a graph risk.
Si vede focus.
Avete ragione, com'è la storia qua? Aspettate. C'è uno, questo. No. Questo. No. Questo. Fatto? No. Okay. No. Risk and return. Risk, as you know, it can be measured by for example, by the standard deviation of the returns of an asset. Return is measured by the annual return, periodic return. And suppose also, it's an assumption that we make, which could be debated, but it's the prevailing in practice, that we have a direct relationship between risk and return, which means that we can draw a line like this, if we have a direct relationship. Direct and linear relationship. And the story goes as follows. The traditional debt has the lowest risk. Debt, let's say, plain vanilla. Okay, lowest risk, lowest return. On the other side, we have the ordinary shares, which have the highest risk and thus the highest return. So this one, just to go straight to the point, remember this was RD, this was RE, right? In our previous set of slides. What happens to the hybrids? The hybrids are intermediate financial instruments, and thus they will position themselves somewhere in the middle between debt and equity. Okay, that's simply what I wanted to tell you, but it's a rather important thing, so I wanted to express it also graphically. Do you mind if I go back to the slides? Thank you very much. Okay. Giusto. Interrompo l'altra condivisione, Cicino, ok? Questa qua, poi riavviare il mouse, poi anche concludere le slide e così sia. Okay? I told you, do you understand this important point of risk-return relationship? Okay. If you don't like the word hybrid because you may not even like it, let's call them intermediate financial securities. Because now you understand the meaning of intermediate in this specific circumstance. However, we could consider the remuneration column. It's not reported here, I'm just sharing it with you. Yes.
I have a question. There are some banks that let you last lend the money and they told you, okay, I
I'm not sure I get your point. What do you mean? There are some banks that give you the money and in exchange for that, what do they ask for?
They told you how to invest the money, so you have the possibility of to choose how to invest the money.
Oh, absolutely. This is what normally happens. When you ask for a loan, you ask for a loan because you want to buy an apartment. It's not because you give me the money, then I'm going to decide what to do.
Is this a hybrid?
No, this is plain vanilla. Hybrid means another thing. The things I was mentioning before. I was mentioning. Okay, I told you that there is another possible interpretation of the final column of this table, remuneration, and the interpretation would be fixed, the cell for debt, discretionary in the cell relative to equity holders, and right, intermediate, partially fixed, partially discretionary for the intermediate financial instruments. Fixed means for debt holders, and what I'm saying is that you could add another column here. Another column says still remuneration 2, fixed, discretionary, intermediate, a little bit fixed, a little bit discretionary. Okay? It's not that complex. Okay? Fixed because when you have a relationship, when you have a debt with a bank, the interest rate is fixed. Fixed means contractually fixed. Not fixed in terms of tasso interesse fisso. It means that it is set in the contract. Okay? The way you pay. It's not discretionary. Oh, this year, you know what, dear bank, I would like to give you 5%. Why? Because it's discretionary. Try and go to the bank and say this and see what the reaction is going to be. Okay? Normally you have an interest rate which is fixed in the contract. You have to follow the rule. Right? On the other side, you have the equity holders. The equity holders expect a remuneration which is the ordinary shares, which is entirely discretionary. It's not compulsory. Okay, compulsory because the dividends, which is the remuneration for the equity holders, is totally discretionary. It's not fixed at all. Companies may distribute dividends, they may not distribute dividends, they distribute a little bit of dividends and retain most of the earnings. In any case, you as an equity holder, you cannot sue the company because the company has decided not to distribute dividends. While the bank can sue you if you don't pay the interest rate. Okay? Then, final word, what happens with the intermediate financial instruments? It happens, for example, let's go back to the preferred shares. It happens that these preferred shareholders are entitled normally to receive a fixed dividend plus something. So it means that a portion of the remuneration of the preferred shareholder is fixed and another one is variable. And that's why this specific feature helps us define these the preferred shares as an intermediate financial instrument. Okay? So I hope that this simple table has helped us to qualify, to highlight the specific characteristics of intermediate instruments, which, as I told you, if we want to summarize this table in one word, we could say that financial hybrids are intermediate financial instruments. How much intermediate? If we go back to the graph that I prepared here, should they be closer to equity or closer to debt? That's a good question. And depends on the characteristics. We see that it depends on the characteristics of the intermediate security. But you should be patient a little bit concerning this specific area. The following table shows you an example of some hybrid instruments. This table, this slide, has been prepared deliberately in order not to be readable. I know that you cannot read that much. Actually, me, even with glasses, I struggle to understand something. And it's only an example. It's literally a cut and paste for a much longer list of possible securities. And you see the hybrids are frequently characterized by acronyms. You have perks, sword, bugs, chips, credits, feline, lips, lion, marks, peps, perks, quip, stabs. No, it seems a joke, actually, but this is the way it works. And each acronym, needless to say, it's written in parentheses, the extended definition. In any case, there is. Have you ever seen La Settimana Enigmistica? Okay. Meno male. Somewhere in La Settimana Enigmistica, you unisci i puntini. No? You join the dots and you get a picture or something. If you unisci i puntini here, you will, or if you find the common denominator of this table, you will see that there are always two words: convertible security, convertible security, convertible security, convertible security, convertible security, convertible. And trust me, if you go out, I'm a short guy, so I can't put that much. There's always these two words: convertible security. Okay. Because the overwhelming majority of hybrid financial instruments can be somehow defined as the type of a convertible bond. A type of, you see that there are various possibilities, but the common denominator of this table is convertible securities. And that's why from now on, for the rest of the day, I'm gonna concentrate my attention on convertible bonds. Because the convertible bond is, if I may use this French expression, is the hybrid par excellence. If you are in a job interview, somebody asks you, have you ever heard about hybrids? Can you provide an example of a hybrid? You should say a convertible bond. Convertible bond is the hybrid par excellence. Okay? And what is a convertible bond? So actually, let me stay back to this, because otherwise you get distracted. A convertible bond is a bond that can be converted. Right, Dan? That's the definition, right? A convertible bond, a bond that can be converted. Not religiously. Converted into what? Into shares. Okay? This simple definition entails a lot of consequences. A convertible bond is a bond, first and foremost, that can be converted normally, leave it, into shares. Let me make the X-ray to this definition. First of all, the convertible bond is a bond, okay? Which means that, like all other bonds, normally it gives the subscriber a certain interest rate. An interest rate, okay? So, a coupon, in other words, 3%, 1%, it's like a bond. So you receive periodically an interest rate. And like a bond, it's senior to the equity in case of problems. Now we know what we mean with that. And in terms also of interest expenses, payment. Convertible bond is a bond that can be converted. This word is the verb can refers to the fact that the holder of a convertible, suppose I have a convertible, this is a convertible bond, great, okay? And I am the holder of the convertible bond, okay? I have the option, the possibility, if you don't like the word option, the possibility of asking the company issuing the bond, if and when I am entitled to do that, and this is disciplined in the bond provision, to say, you know what, rather than giving me the money back to repay me cash, give me a certain number of shares. This is a possibility, an option that the holder has that can be exercised at his or her discretion. And simultaneously, on the other side, the company, the issuing the bond, must follow the decision of the convertible bond holder. In other words, if I have a bond and I say, you know what, its maturity has arrived. Now I shall decide, shall I want my money back or a certain number of shares? And I suppose that I decide I prefer the shares. And you are the company. If I say I want the shares, you cannot say no. You want the shares, but I want to give you the cash. It's an option for me, something compulsory for the company to execute what the bondholder has decided to do. So convertible bond is a bond. Now I understand what I mean. That can be converted, but it's not necessarily converted into shares. Into shares issued by whom? Which shares? The overwhelming majority of convertible securities can be converted into the shares of the company that has issued the bonds. I don't know. Telecom Italia issues a convertible bond that can be converted into Telecom Italia shares. This is what normally happens. However, I must also say that there are some cases in which the convertible bonds can be converted into shares of a third company, an external company. Okay? Telecom Italia can issue convertible bonds that can be converted into, I'm guessing it's just an example, can be converted into the shares of Enel. In this case, we no longer call them pure convertible bonds, we call them exchangeable bonds, which is a convertible bond that can be converted into another entity shares. Okay? A final word on let me go back for 1 second. Let me go back for 1 second to the verb can be converted. Okay, I told you that it's an option that me as a bondholder I do have, that I can exercise or not to convert into shares. There are a minority number of convertible bonds, definitely a minority. Okay, minority means 5%, 10%, probably less than 10%, so definitely a minority of convertible bonds whose conversion into shares is not discretionary, is compulsory. So they must be converted into shares at maturity of the bond. And in this case we call mandatory convertible bonds. Okay, so very simple, mandatory convertible bonds. A final word on the, well actually more than a final word, where is it? Okay, so that's about the definition. An additional thing that I want to say, because you may have heard about this instrument, but they are quite popular in Italy as well, the so-called bond with warrants, bond cum warrant. What is a bond cum warrant? A bond cum warrant is very similar to a convertible bond, okay? Because a bond cum warrant gives the bondholder the opportunity to subscribe shares. So to this regard, they are very similar. I mean, convertible bond allows the bondholder to convert into shares the bond. A bond with warrant allows the bondholder to become a shareholder. The difference is, what are the differences? 2/3 important differences that deeply differentiate the bond cum warrant from the convertible bond. First, a convertible bond, if and when is converted into shares, it expires. The bond no longer exists. It's like a mutante with a T. Mutante because it converts into something else. Il bruco e la farfalla. The bruco no longer exists. Now we have the farfalla, the butterfly. Okay? And that's the convertible bond. A bond with warrant, has an existence which is, the bond I mean, which is independent of the exercise of the warrant. The warrant is an option to buy some shares at a specific price within or at a specific maturity. È un buono acquisto. The warrant, if you want to go very straight to the point, I'm talking to the Italians especially, I'm sorry, is what we call a buono acquisto. You have literally, once when the things were not electronic, but you can still find sometimes in the, come si dice, mercato delle pulci, street market, no, free markets, bravo. You can find in the free markets some examples of bond with warrants. Trust me, they're very nice. I mean, it depends if you are perverse or not. But I have one. You have a bond. What used to be Montecatini Terme. He issues a bond with the following characteristics: maturity, interest rate, no? And then there were some, gli annunci delle case di studio, there were some bonds that were attached. There was one warrant, that could be physically detached. One warrant. And each warrant said, this warrant entitles you to buy one share at this price within this period of time. So you could detach, go to the cashier of the company and say, I want this share. This is the 20 euros that it's written on the bond. Give me one share. Okay? But as you can understand, if you detach the warrant from the bond still lives. The bond with warrant has an existence which is independent of the warrants. You can exercise the warrants, you could forget exercising the warrants, whatever you decide to do with the warrants is totally independent from the bond. And that's the major difference with the convertible bond, because the convertible bond has the conversion option embedded in the contract. It's not attached, it's implicit in the contract. So that when you convert the bond into shares, the bond expires and you become a shareholder. Okay? So that's the major difference, actually the difference. Needless to say, there is also another consequence which is a corollary of what I just said. Okay? The corollary is the following. Think about what happens with the convertible. Now we wear the hat of the CFO of a company. Antonio Salvi is the CFO of, suppose, Lavazza. Lavazza decides to go for a convertible bond. What are the cash inflows and the cash outflows that I do expect as the CFO of Lavazza linked to this convertible bond? And the story goes as follows. I issue the bond, I raise the money, cash inflow. The bond lives a certain number of years, I pay on a regular basis the interest rate, cash outflow. Then what happens at maturity? Two things may happen. Tertium non datur. Two things may happen. Alternative A. The bondholder doesn't want to convert it to shares and need to repay him or her cash. Big cash outflow. Alternatively, the bondholder could say, you know what, I would prefer receiving some shares. In that case, you give a piece of paper to the bondholder, which is a share. You don't give cash. With the bond with warrant, the situation is slightly different because you issue the bond with warrant, you get a cash inflow. The bond lives its life, you pay an interest rate. But then, the bond with warrant always the bond component of the bond with warrant always arrives at maturity and you repay it cash. So the company knows that it's going to have a cash inflow now. Then we have small cash outflows, the interest payment, and a big cash outflow, the capital repayment at maturity. So you would tend to say, well, in terms of cash flows, probably the convertible bond alternative is better, because you may have cash inflow, interest rate, and if at maturity, if the bondholder decides not to convert it to shares, you don't have any cash outflow. true. You don't forget that with the bond with warrants, it is true that you have cash inflow, small cash outflows, big cash outflow, but you may also have, and normally that happens, cash inflows coming from what? From the exercise of the warrants, from l'utilizzo dei buoni acquisto. That when the holder of the warrant goes to the company, it's not that just presenting the coupon that you get the share. Normally you pay also, it's called an exercise price. Actually, you have done derivatives, right? We are in the world of call options. A warrant is a call option, okay? That has an exercise price, has a time to maturity, and has an underlying asset, okay? Is that okay for you? Okay, convertible bonds are quite, popular. The market for convertible bonds is a rather, thick market because, for example, I'm sorry this is written in Italian, but in any case it's convertible bonds issue in Europe, okay, from 1990 to 2019, which means basically 30 years, and the bars are expressed in billions of euros. So you see that. In 2019, for example, there was around $25 billion of convertible bonds, and this is not a marginal, only Europe. This is not a marginal, it's not a trivial amount of money, okay? It is quite volatile, because you see that the bars go up and down, but it is also true that even in the worst circumstances, less than $10 billion only in Europe, you don't observe. Then you have North America, then you have Asia, then you have other markets in which the convertible bonds are also quite popular. Okay, let's share some terminology concerning convertible bonds, and then we leave the room for lunch. First of all, conversion period. What do we mean with conversion period? The conversion period means now we are back in the convertible bonds. I forget the bonds with warrants. We have seen the differences, we've seen how they work, but now we're focusing on convertible bonds. The conversion period states, and it is disciplined in the bond indenture, the bond contract, when you as a bondholder are entitled to decide if you want to receive cash or shares. And let me use the jargon of options that you have learned recently, and I hope I remember it correctly. Normally convertible bonds are the conversion option embedded in the convertible bond is of, which one is American or European? The one that you can exercise during the maturity, not only at maturity. It's American, right? American option. You know what I'm talking about? No? Molto bene. You don't speak, but your eyes speak for you. I suoi occhi non fanno. Buonasera. Well, forget American, European type of options. Most of the convertible bonds can be exercised definitely at maturity. That's obvious. But in a lot of circumstances, even earlier than maturity. And these exercise windows, they're called exercise windows, are disciplined in the contract. There are some periods, or even more likely, you can convert your bonds into shares starting from a certain date. This is the classical one, okay? Okay, that's the conversion period. What about the most important thing? The most important thing is that we introduce now, and I don't know, probably we will go back on that, because this is the most important thing of a convertible bond, is the conversion premium. The conversion premium, well, let's go this way. I have to go back to the familiar with this? Change. Probably you know what I can use. Just 1 second. Let's see if it works, because I don't like them much, those big markers. No, you could. Suppose that we have a convertible bond, okay, whose face.
Professore, noi non riusciamo a vedere.
Hai ragione. Hai ragione, ma hai ragione di che? Ah no, guarda. Ah, forse devo fare quella roba figa quella.
Perfetto.
Hai visto?
Sì?
Face value, suppose 100,000 euros. Non potete vedere? No, sì. Face value 100,000 euros. Suppose that the maturity is 5 years. Okay? Suppose that this bond can be converted into che è successo? Siete eccitati con l'esempio? Un po' di bromuro? What's wrong?
Sorry, the face value is 1,000 or 100,000?
1,000. When do you see the 100,000 here? Maturity 5 years. This number here is 5. It's not 5,000. 5.
No, because you said.
No, non elaborare oltre, hai detto una cavolata. Dico, the conversion ratio, suppose that is 50 shares. What do we mean with conversion ratio? It means that when you are entitled to do that, you can either have 1,000 back or 50 shares. The conversion ratio is the number of shares that you will receive in case you decide to go for the shares option, not the cash repayment. Okay? Now we're entering into the magical world of the conversion premium. The conversion premium is computed as follows. 1,000, this is 1,000 euros divided by 50 shares, which is 20 euros each. Well, actually, this is not conversion premium. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. This is conversion price. The premium will come immediately after. The conversion price is 20 euros. It means that, think about it. This is a convertible bond. It says 1,000 euros or 50 shares. It's up to you. Okay? Great. I wait 5 years. Okay? And then the company says, so what do you want to do? You want the shares or the money back? If I say I want the shares, it means, and I know that you're giving me 50 shares, and I know that alternatively I may have 1,000 euros, it means that I'm abandoning the idea of getting 1,000 euros in exchange for 50 pieces of paper, which implicitly for me will cost 20 euros each. You understand what I mean? It's the implicit price that you are de facto paying for having chosen the alternative of receiving shares and abandoning the idea of receiving cash. Give me 2 minutes more, I'm sorry for that. Suppose also that the share price of the issuing company at the issue time is I don't know, 15 euros. 15 euros. This difference between the conversion price and the share price, market share price, so the issuing company, this difference is the conversion premium. And it's given, normally it's expressed as a percentage, and it's given by 20 euros divided by 15 euros, which is roughly 30% minus 1 is roughly 33%. Vabbè, facciamo le cose così. Quant'è? 20 diviso 15 ce l'ho. 20 diviso 15. 33%, l'ho detto. 33%. This is our conversion premium, on which I'm going to elaborate a lot after the lunch break. See you at 2 to 5. Okay?
我觉得饭都没热呢。我觉得你都不吃甜点来着。上次我就在想那个马串，是不是应该给你买别的？当时我在想。
不会啊，我吃到
太甜了。
你到我家，你就会发现我有零食柜。哦，我靠！
第一次看 green tea 的。
反正不会有人给我。